Good evening. Welcome to Community and Technology, where we connect the global community with news, information, and resources to hopefully help improve your life. I'm Stu Reid, here with my esteemed co-host, Dave Burstein. Hey, Dave.
Hello.
How you doing today, man?
Well, 20 years ago, I did one of the first reports on redlining by Verizon and Fios.
Mm-hmm.
We had some data points. I think it was Senator Ed Markey, that point of representative, who had found a lot of data around Boston, and they, of course, denied it. Well,
Yes.
they
Mm-hmm.
couldn't deny it this time. Two data journalists at the markup tested 850,000 addresses in
Wow.
Verizon, AT&T, and CenturyLink. As I say, data scientists, and they found some way to automatically do it off the website
Mm-hmm.
and found a distinct pattern at all the telcos of some people getting fiber and some people getting DSL at a tenth the speed. Stu, what
Hmm.
neighborhoods do you think got what?
Let me take a wild guess. How about the black neighborhoods? How about the low income neighborhoods? How about the Latino neighborhoods?
Or as our congressman says, we have a fiber desert in Washington
Yes.
Heights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
know it's funny, Dave. You're talking about a 20-year ago study. You're probably looking at the internet 20 years ago, but you and I have been around long enough to we can rewind 30 or 4 or more years ago, and remember when there was cable TV redlining in this progressive city of New York City back in the 80s.
Well, I didn't have cable. I never got cable TV. Uh, I so I didn't really notice that one, but I think you were out there.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And in particular, you know, when the city of New York let out the franchises for the outer boroughs, Manhattan, as you know, and maybe some of our listeners know, got cable TV very early on in the 1960s, largely because of the pioneering efforts of Chuck Dolan, who decided to connect up phone exchanges all over and run TV over it, and also because of the poor reception in many apartment buildings in New York City. So initially, the cable had basically the over-the-air channels and a few other channels that were thrown in. Fast forward, the outer boroughs did not have cable until the mid 1980s. 1984 was when they finally put out the RFPs. Cablevision ended up getting the franchise for the Bronx and for most of Brooklyn, at the time, the largest single cable franchise anywhere in the country. And what they did is they decided to break each of those two boroughs into 5 phases and go after the affluent neighborhoods first, which they said were the only ones that could afford cable, and that they needed to do that in order to finance their build out. And of course, they rendered the Black and Latino neighborhoods, the low income neighborhoods, as last phase 5 in their 10-year build plan, Dave. 10 years they laid out. So they were going to get to areas of East New York and Brooklyn and the South Bronx to 8 to 10 years after they got their franchise. It was amazing, and the city rolled over. The city rolled over and said, "Okay, let them go ahead with their what I call total redlining, and what they called a phase build plan." And this was in the mid 1980s, and they did it under the name of economic, that they can only afford to build out as they acquired customers, and they can only do that in affluent neighborhoods. As you and I know, and I'm working with my partner Doug Frazier and others, we knew that poor folks back then and still today are voracious consumers of entertainment media, as they are now of internet when they can get it. And we were huge consumers back then, but mainstream media and mainstream operators didn't recognize that and continued to marginalize us. So I guess I'm not surprised, fast forward 30, 40 years later, that we're seeing the same redlining when it comes to the internet. And that's a huge sample size, Dave. You said 800,000 people this person looked at?
Yep. They Verizon and AT&T have ways you can check on the web what's available to you. and they automated it.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Now, what
Yeah.
about the price? What about the pricing? Is the pricing uniform across all those territories?
Yes, it's just as expensive for 5 megabits as it is for 300.
Mm-hmm.
Same price.
Okay. Wow.
Now, a similar story. Now, this was on the telco side,
Mm-hmm.
where they still have about half fiber and half DSL at the big carriers, maybe even a little bit less fiber. Now, on the cable side, they confirmed to me they actually have the same regular pricing. But a community group in Los Angeles went out and checked. And they went to, this was mostly Time Warner Cable, Spectrum, and they found that there were different offers for signing up in different parts of Los Angeles.
Mm.
Steve,
Wow.
what neighborhoods do you think had faster internet offers? Same
Dare I
price.
say the affluent neighborhoods?
They only had 150 in their sample, but it was enough to be pretty solid. And I checked it with Time Warner, and the
Mm-hmm.
PR guy said, "Well, that isn't true after 2 years, but it definitely was true on the advertised price." And they didn't even put the regular price anywhere on the website. You can't find them
That's
at
incredible.
the
That's
cable
incredible.
guys.
Then, and all this is in the same city that we're talking about, right?
All in Los Angeles.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, redlining's been an accusation for a long time that they slough off. And in fact, the folks at the markup who did the 850,000 survey heard from Verizon that, oh no. And in any case, it costs us more to use the old DSL lines than the new fiber lines. So, of
Mm-hmm.
course, we charge just as much for the slow speeds. Now, the difference in cost between using the DSL lines and the fiber lines may be 50 or 75 cents a month.
Mm.
I happen to be the expert in how much broadband costs.
You're talking about on the provider side, what it costs them to
On the
provide it.
provider side, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it costs somewhere between $4 and $8 a month to essentially any of the existing large networks to add a customer. The
Mm-hmm.
same is true on the wireless side. Now, AT&T this month was really proud. They added 338,000 new subscribers on their fiber, which they've been building out. They're now at about 18 million of their 40-something million homes passed.
Mm-hmm.
However, because nobody wants what's now the very slow DSL, they lost 350,000 DSL subscribers and had a net loss.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they frankly had decided 10 years ago, both Verizon and AT&T, and I reported, that it was too expensive to upgrade the entire network. Verizon has now done about half of theirs, 17 million, 16, 17 million. AT&T just hit 18 million, but they were way behind for a decade,
Mm-hmm.
within a decade. Uh, and they would let those neighborhoods go, shut down the whole phone system,
Mm.
use their wireless for whatever they could do. Now, how good do you think a wireless connection is instead of a wired connection this year?
I would think the wired should be better, but it depends. Are we talking fiber? Are we talking DSL? Are we talking copper? But theoretically, the wire should be better.
Well, it's true if there's fiber, because fiber today is almost always a gigabit.
Mm-hmm.
But DSL, the kind they used in the United States, rarely is more than 24 megabits.
Mm.
And often, a surprising percentage it's only 1 to 7 megabits.
Wow.
Well, that was pretty good in the day.
Yeah, yeah. 20 years ago, that was great.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
But let me ask you a
but
related question, Dave. Why do you think, I have my own ideas, but why is it that poor people and poor communities get charged more for inferior service than the well-to-do neighborhoods? I mean, it seems like the logic is turned on its head. What's going on there? What's your take on that?
well, because in the case of the phone companies where they left DSL, they decided they were going to let those neighborhoods go. That they were literally going to turn off all the copper phone lines.
Mm-hmm.
They've been applying at the FCC for permission to do that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And just serve them with wireless because it's not that they couldn't make money on the copper lines or make money if they replaced them with fiber. They just make more money with just having one wireless network as opposed to having a wireless and a wireline network.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Ericsson, the CEO yesterday morning European time, said, well, he thinks everywhere they can go wireless, people will. Since he only makes wireless networks these days and doesn't make any copper networks, that's it's not so surprising. But it's mostly true, has a lot of implications. One of the other things that's happening is that the phone I'm talking to you now, which I can't pick up because I'll lose the video if I do, gets 300 megabits most of the places.
Mm-hmm.
It gets 95 megabits inside my apartment. That's what mid-band 5G can do. And over 2 million people have now switched to $50 a month, sometimes with specials, uh, 50 to 500 megabit wireless connections instead of cable. They're usually $50 and cable is usually about $70. And
Mm-hmm.
frankly, 95 megabits is just fine for most purposes.
Mm-hmm.
And people are jumping on surprisingly fast to the point that last quarter, the cable guys actually lost subscribers because so many people switched to wireless.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. There was a net 400,000 wireless and a negative net on cable.
Mm-hmm.
Like slight positive net on DSL.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does this mean for the federal program that wants to spend $42 billion making sure everybody has a wired connection?
To me, it means a lot of fiber builders are going to make a ton of money. That's what it means.
They're only wasting about half of the 42 billion,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I can see. I don't think I think about half of the money is actually going to go to where people can't get a great connection right now.
Some of the rural areas.
That's only in the rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
The cities are entirely covered in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
99%. Uh, but they're saying, well, it's a good thing for the country because that fiber will last forever. Well, what happens if people don't care about the fiber and everybody in New York City goes wireless?
I think they call that a stranded asset, don't they, Dave?
That's actually the technical term.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know if that's going to happen. My best guess is that most people are going to keep a landline for a good long time, but nobody really knows. And they're actually putting up those kiosks. We've seen a lot of them in the city now that are about 11 feet tall or so.
Mm-hmm.
They're putting up 32-foot kiosks thousands and thousands of them that are designed for millimeter wave or mid-band 5G, hundreds of megabits, and that may take over. I
Mm.
don't know, and neither do the people at the feds who are giving out all the money. The people who want to send fiber, the Fiber Broadband Association and so on, are saying you should do fiber because fiber is forever. Stu, if you put in fiber, or Verizon put in fiber in 2003, almost 20 years ago, how well do you think that's working now?
I suspect it needs a lot of maintenance and upgrade. I know, the number of fibers has changed dramatically. The capacity of fibers has changed dramatically. You're talking about 20-year-old technology. Now, I've heard, Dave, you correct me, I've heard folks say, well, the fiber is the fiber. It's all about the electronics you put on one end or the other. But I can't believe there haven't been incredible advances in the fiber itself in the last 20 years.
And in fact, eventually some of them, it's the shielding is going to wear away and the
Mm-hmm.
rain will get to it. And the guy who owns IO, the biggest independent fiber uh, carrier in the United States, just said that yes, they have some fiber that's now 20 years old and they have to replace it. It
Wow.
does wear out, it's not
Mm-hmm.
forever. There are other people who say on average it'll make it 40 years. Some people say it'll be 15, but everybody in policy has heard the fiber guys say fiber is forever.
Mm.
The guys who actually run the network say it's not.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
That's a
And
stunning discrepancy.
oh, they got really angry when somebody started saying that in Washington. But I've got I've got it from the guys who run the networks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how. Now, Wednesday, Wednesday? Yes, Wednesday, I got really annoyed because down in Washington at Georgetown University, they were doing a session on spectrum needs.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the wireless carriers always want spectrum. They don't happen to need any for at least the next 5 years and probably the next 10 years. They all except Dish, got 100 megabits or more, megahertz or more of the mid-band spectrum and more than doubled their capacity. It's enough to carry them for years, so they don't really need some. But they pay Meredith Baker Atwell, rather, Meredith Atwell. She was married to James Baber, the top Republican for. In fact, I don't think he's died yet. So I guess she's still married to him.
Mm-hmm.
$6 million a year to run the lobbying company for the cable guys.
Wow. Nice chunk of
I
change.
apologize for she's got the wireless guys.
Mm-hmm.
Mike
Okay.
Powell, who would run the FCC, he's got the cable guys. Last time I saw they were only paying him $3 million, but he's probably gotten a raise since then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for that kind of money, you keep lobbying and keep demanding and keep trying to send cable. So, Georgetown University, in particular, Center for Business and Technology or something, has very close ties. Wednesday, they had 12 people, including the head of NTIA Spectrum, that's his federal agency, talking about what we need in Spectrum. Well, one of the people was from the Wireless Association, Tom Power.
Mm-hmm.
The second of the 12 people used to be at the wireless organization, and now I guess is lobbying on her own or is semi-retired. And the third was hired by the Wireless Association in order to do a survey on spectrum.
Mm.
Now, he works for Analysis Mason, who actually are a competent firm that usually gets their facts right. But this time he didn't. The report came out saying not that anybody needed more spectrum, because he couldn't say that, but it did say that some other countries had more mid-band spectrum, and mid-band, where you can get 100 megahertz at a time, is the key spectrum these days. And in fact, in China and in several other countries, they have more licensed mid-band spectrum because we took out 150 megahertz and shared it, which means you get 2 or 3 or 50 times as much capacity out of the same amount of spectrum. The 50 times number comes from a survey that was paid for by Facebook that was probably as biased as the one that was just paid for by the Wireless Association. Unfortunately, they left out a third of the mid-band spectrum in the United States. Somehow they found a definition that didn't cover the 160 megahertz that T-Mobile had at 2.5. Now, everybody else calls that mid-band, and there's an ongoing debate whether it works as well or better than Verizon's 3,500 megahertz spectrum. But there's no doubt it's mid-band spectrum just as much. They just left it out.
So what, they were just trying to show that we are behind in the arms race for spectrum compared to other countries around the globe. Is that what was going on?
That was what the claim was. And if you don't count a third of the spectrum, we're
behind.
Noticeably behind.
Wow.
Now, I sent that out to some of Brett's people, including the ones who were likely to show at that event. And just what I told you, that they were faking it. And so far, none of the reporters have picked up that expensive survey that the CTIA has done all the publicity for, and somehow persuaded this institute at Georgetown to do a conference specializing in. I don't know. That particular institute at Georgetown, about 8 years ago, no, about more than 10 years ago, at a conference with 8 speakers, and I was able to identify 5 of them being on the payroll one way or another of the phone companies, including one ex-senator who Verizon was paying $200,000 a year. He was the one who did the big 1996 Telephone Act. So just for an occasional speech, Verizon was paying him $200,000 a year to lobby for them. But I also found 4 others who had taken money in the recent past. Oh, yes, in Georgetown, I did know that at least 2 and probably 4 or 5 of the other 9 speakers were on the payroll. They did get 2 people in government and 1 person from the Center for Democracy and Technology to show that they were fair, even, and balanced. They didn't only have people who were paid off by the telcos or the cable cos, just 3/4 of the speakers.
Right. It's amazing, Dave. I don't know of any other industry. There probably are others, but it just seems like the telecom industry is so top loaded and controlled by the vested interest that you don't even hear any real critique. You don't hear any the kind of stuff that you raise and talk about on this show. You don't hear it in the mainstream media at all.
Well, in Washington, they have a few $billion a year spent on telecom lobbying, or most of them are lawyers who'd rather not be called lobbyists, even though that's what they're almost all doing. There's I was in a room once with the Federal Communications Bar Association, nearly all of whom were lawyers who were lobbying. There were 1,000 people in that room. It's the same ballroom at, I guess it was the Hilton, where Reagan had spoken to over 1,000 Republican sympathizers and fundraisers and got shot on as he walked out.
Mm-hmm.
But there were over 1,000, many of whom were paid. The going rate for a top lobbyist in Washington starts at $1 million, and as I say, Meredith Athwell is pulling 6 according to the official 990 form filing.
Wow.
I don't know if that's out of line with a lot of the other lobbyists. Traditionally, the phone companies and the drug companies were the really big spenders in Washington. The tech companies are working really hard to catch up, though. And in fact, in Belgium, at the EU, several of the members of the European Parliament have called for censuring the big US tech companies because they've been creating these organizations that say they're grassroots small business and things like that, all funded by the giant tech companies.
Wow.
And how much are they spending? I don't have a number out of the EU. It's enough that they're very unhappy because they're not used to being paid off at that level. But Google has over 100 in their Washington lobbying office.
Wow.
Yeah, that's not quite one for every senator.
Wow. That's a
Whereas Bell South always would have 1 or 2 for every senator, part of whose job was to volunteer in campaign season to work for the senator.
Wow. I'm astounded.
Yeah.
Well, Dave, we're about halfway into our show here. We got to take a brief break.
Go to it.
Okay, so this is Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned. We're going to be right back after a brief musical break. Okay, we're back. This is Community Technology. Stu Reid, Dave Burstein on WHCR 90.3. Before the break, we were talking about the big telecoms and the huge lobbying presence they have in Washington. And I think Dave has some further updates. Dave.
Yeah. Well, lobbying is basically paying off the politicians legally, or at least normally legally. And meanwhile, paying off everybody else who's likely to have an opinion, so that almost the only thing you hear at something like a Spectrum event are the people who are paid by the phone companies. Not 100%, only 70, 80, 90% of the people you hear. But last week, AT&T got caught actually paying off state senator in Illinois.
Really? That's not lobbying, is it, Dave?
They agreed to pay a $23 million fine to make it go away because the leading excuse me, 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
The leading Democrat in the state legislature was indicted for taking payoffs. And that was a big federal investigation. And they got a couple of people to turn state's evidence. They turned on the state, I guess it was the state Senate leader, but I'm not sure. And among other things, testified that he took a $20,000 payoff to let AT&T start dismantling their copper network. We talked before about how they'd, in some neighborhoods, especially the less affluent neighborhoods, they wouldn't turn off all the copper and just go wireless because it's even more profitable to have a single network. The bagman, and somebody, probably the bagman himself, was testifying about that in federal court, and AT&T couldn't deny it. Wow. They actually had paid off to get the legislation through that they wanted. Now, I'm sure that happens a whole lot of other things. There was a really nice headline, and I think it was The Verge, about what AT&T has just done. They paid $23 million, and they swore they wouldn't do any more payoffs. They didn't pretend they hadn't been paying off people, and they'll probably be a little bit more careful. But yeah.
Wow, that's stunning.
No, it's not. The only thing
business as
stunning
usual.
about it
I'm
was
sorry,
how
Dad.
cheap it.
That's business as usual. The stunning part was they got caught.
Yeah. The other stunning part was how cheap it was.
Yeah, $20,000. That's not even lunch money. The $23 million fine is lunch money for AT&T. 20,000? Jesus.
Yeah, and
that's loose change.
Yeah. Now, also in Illinois, which is pretty famous for political corruption, Bobby Rush, who's still in the, I believe is still a congressman, took AT&T for $1 million contribution, literally $1 million contribution, to the Bobby Rush Foundation that did things like pay for kids' basketball leagues and other community stuff. This was a number of years ago, maybe even 15 years ago. And he'd also hired his son for a few $100,000. The group that AT&T gave $1 million to. That's a more likely number than the 20,000. It was surprising how little. I
Yeah.
mean, you can't even buy a Banana Republic dictator for that kind of money.
Wow.
Now, how much do you think it's going to cost the CEO of AT&T, John Stankey, that his company paid off?
You mean in terms of a fine?
No, in terms of less money in his pocket this
Oh,
year.
not a dime. He's getting a raise. Not a dime.
Yeah, probably getting a raise. The last I saw, he was making 29 million a year,
Mm-hmm.
of which three-quarters were stock options and bonuses of various things.
Mm-hmm.
And the last I saw, they could break the law around the world, and that wouldn't cut the CEO salary.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
However, I'd worry if I were the CEO of Verizon.
Why?
Well, the stock went down $10 billion yesterday.
That sounds like a big number percentage-wise. What is that, Dave? Is that
7%.
oh, that's a big drop.
That is a big drop.
That's a significant drop. What's that being attributed to?
That's being attributed to the fact that they lost subscribers on the wireless side.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And the reason they lost subscribers on the wireless side is that AT&T is basically giving you a free $600 to $800 iPhone if you sign up with them. And people are going for that.
Mm-hmm. At Verizon's expense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Verizon has nominally matched it, but they're not advertising it and they're not making it easy to get the money.
Mm-hmm.
So Verizon is now at its lowest stock price in 11 years.
Mm.
That is something that CEOs get fired for.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Mike Dano, who's actually the best reporter on telecom in the US, he's at Light Reading, has been pointing out a number of other things that have gone wrong for Hans. I like Hans. He's been very friendly. He's a nice guy. He's community minded. He shows up at all the best charity events, or the best charity events in our field, like the UN Broadband Commission, where they bring in a lot of rich people around the world and get some money out of them all. But there's another reason why he has to worry. Charter, a few weeks ago, actually invited their CEO, Tom Rutledge, to resign.
Invited him to resign? That sounds like a bit of a euphemism there, Dave.
He didn't have to give up his pension or anything.
Okay.
But he was still running the company 3 years after his 65th birthday, which is when most businessmen resign.
Mm-hmm.
And they managed to lose half the 140, $150 billion the company was worth.
They lost half of it. What do you mean, the stock value or an actual
stock value?
Stock value?
Stock value. The profits were still up there.
Mm-hmm.
The stock price plummeted.
Mm.
It plummeted at Comcast, but not as much. And the Roberts actually have enough stock to control it. So, do you remember John Malone?
Since of course, come on.
Days?
500 channels and nothing to watch. He was the cable king for the longest.
He's still the cable king. He controls Charter, the second largest cable. Yeah, second largest cable company. He's 80 now.
I was about to say he's got to be up there. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he didn't mind that somebody kept working till 68.
Mm-hmm.
But when you lose that man, $50-70 billion worth of stock value.
Ooh. That's a big number.
Nobody said that Tom Rutledge was invited to resign. Everybody had the official announcement talked about his great service to the company.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was invited to resign after
Yes.
that stock
Wow.
loss.
That's a big loss. Now you said, was there any attribution for that? That's a huge loss. I mean, I guess he's the fall guy, but what happened?
Uh, we should bring Craig Moffat on the radio sometime. He's the
Okay.
best. He's the best Wall Street analyst in this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and been watching this very closely. He, in fact, 2 weeks ago said the stock had gone down, prices had gone down too much.
Mm-hmm.
That that investors had realized that the cable companies had a problem. In fact, they had several problems. AT&T is building 4 million lines of fiber every year. And on those 4 million lines, on average, 37% of the people who had been with cable switched over to AT&T fiber.
Mm-hmm.
The other telephone companies, everybody except Verizon, are also building a pile of fiber. Century and Frontier each have 1 million lines on the way. I think 3 million at Century, which now is called Lumen. Used to be called Quest, and before that, US West. There's a lot of fiber coming. It's taking lines from cable.
Mm-hmm.
Last quarter, as I say, cable went negative, partly because we now have this quarter came in, or we'll get T-Mobile on Monday or Tuesday, and 500,000 people every quarter are switching to wireless because it's $50 instead of $70.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot more convenient. You don't have to stay home for a whole day after waiting 3 weeks in order to get your fiber line or
Right.
wired line installed.
Mm-hmm.
You just stop off at the dealers, pick up a box, go home, and connect yourself.
Mm. Wow.
So that 2 million people have switched to wireless, and that's enough to start affecting the stock prices of the companies. In addition, there really have been a lot of people turning off their cable TV.
Mm-hmm.
A while back, maybe 10 years ago, 85% of the United States was paying for cable TV. That's now down to 77%, I think.
That's significant. I mean, for the longest, it was on the uptick, up, climbing, and now it
Yep.
sounds like it's reversed itself.
Well, I hate to say this, but Jenny has Amazon Prime and Netflix,
Mm-hmm.
and of course can download a whole lot of stuff from the internet. She's turned off her cable TV and not missing anything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And many folks are doing that. There's so much content available if you've got an internet connection that unless there's something really special that you got to have, almost everything's available online.
Yeah. The only thing really special that most people care about, not most people care about, but a lot of people care about, is sports.
Yeah, live sports. Yeah.
So when you're seeing these baseball players getting $400 million contracts, which sometimes you see,
Mm-hmm.
that's because the only thing that makes people buy cable TV is things like NFL Sunday Ticket.
Mm-hmm.
And they're spending, the networks trying to survive are spending billions and billions on it.
Mm-hmm. But interestingly, this year, for the first time, a big NFL package of Thursday night football is now on Prime, not on broadcast TV.
And they're probably paying billions for that too.
I'm sure they are. Yeah.
Now, I'm sure that the owners do better than the players.
No,
The players
you kidding me? Yeah, the players ain't hurting, but the billionaire owners are like smiling all the way to the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember they cut this basketball season short a few years ago?
during
because the
the
others weren't making enough.
yes, yeah, yeah.
They locked out the players for half the
Mm-hmm.
season.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, somehow I don't feel sorry for the CEO of AT&T.
No, no.
Moffat just said that it looks like their cash flow this year, they've traditionally done 20 billion a year, was only going to be 14 billion.
Oh my God.
And that was a serious problem.
Yes.
Uh,
Incredible. Yeah.
yeah.
So we just got a
Uh,
couple minutes left, Dave. Are there any other things going on in the news that you wanted to mention or highlight before we go?
yeah, loads of it. Tell us, tell me about what you expect will happen when we start getting automated driving systems and people use them more and more.
You know, it scares me to death, to be quite honest with you, Dave. I like driving and I like controlling my vehicle. And I see the commercials for the self-parking vehicles. I see the commercials of the guy taking his hands off the wheels, driving down the highway. That scares the heck out of me. Turning that over to some software. Um,
11 people were killed in
mhm.
US crashes involving vehicles using automated driving systems from mid May through September, according to newly released government data.
Wow, you said 11.
11.
Wow.
Now, that's probably fewer than would have died if the drivers were in control.
hmm
There's a lot of drunk drivers on the road.
Yeah. And a lot of incompetent drivers on the road as well. People that just, are incompetent behind the wheel. I see it every day.
Uh, but that's a hard thing because you looked in horror when you heard the 11 were killed.
Yeah.
And the people who are actually working on autonomous vehicles are very aware that even if they are much safer, which they expect them to be, that probably won't be good enough if
Yeah.
they're not perfect.
I
And
guess it's
that's
a strange. I guess it's a strange psychological thing, David. I'm certainly guilty of it. You'd rather have a person be responsible for a crash than some software program, if that makes any kind of sense.
well, that's in fact what the people working on the automated driving believe as well,
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to have to meet a higher standard.
Mm-hmm.
And even if they have 90% fewer people dying, that may not be enough.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
okay. I
Mm-hmm.
got a few more like that, I think. Uh,
Got time for one more, David, then we gotta go.
okay. Dolly.
Okay.
I'm using it all the time. There was a big thing in the Times this morning about one of the artificial intelligence programs that had a big event in San Francisco, and how they're realizing that the Web3 and the metaverse and the crypto all don't are not going to live up to the hype. So they needed new hype. And the hot new hype in California is the artificial intelligence programs that can, in fact, do illustration for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've used 3 of them on my website.
Mm-hmm.
I had an article about the Emperor of 5G having no clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, the old Hans Christian Andersen story. The 5G just isn't doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And all the claims, there hasn't been a single important advance in 5G, and it's been out there for 3 years now, not
Wow.
one. And it was
That's
supposed to
that's
change
amazing.
the world.
That's amazing.
Okay. But I had a problem. I used Dolly from
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI,
Okay.
which is money from, among others, Microsoft and Elon Musk and so on. Dolly has 1.5 million users creating more than 2 million images every day.
Wow.
Now, I had a problem, however, because the way you work Dolly is you say, I want a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge in the style of Renoir or Mondrian.
Mm-hmm.
And it can do it.
Okay. Hmm.
And in fact, I had the 5G Emperor with Emperor in gold and 5G embellished in the background on it. But I couldn't get the one I want because when I said 5G Emperor without clothes, they said I was breaking their terms of service and they couldn't generate it.
Well, the
Now,
no clothes was the problem, huh?
no clothes was the problem. On the other hand, Stable Diffusion, which just went 150, raised 115 million, has no limits like that. So I should have gone there instead of OpenAI.
Wow.
And the Times also said that Google and Meta have these things working. They just haven't released them to the public.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Meta, they actually can do a 15-second video. You just tell them the subject and it will come up with a video. 3 out of 4 really don't make it. But 1 out of 4, they're enough for my website illustration.
Wow. That's some amazing stuff. Maybe one day we can demonstrate some of that stuff on the show, at least for our folks that have the video of our show. We might be able to show some stuff sometime. Yeah.
Okay. So
Okay.
until next week.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dave. This has been Dave Burstein and Stu Reid with Community and Technology on WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. Stay tuned every Wednesday, 5 to 6 p.m. Thanks for tuning in. You just might learn something. Good night.